Welcome to Eat Fat Grow Slim. So if you've ever been on a diet and it's not gone well, or if you've been on a diet and it went well but subsequently you put the weight back on, or if you're just thinking of trying to go on a diet and you want another way aside from the calorie controlled diets, then you're in the right place. Now, part of what gave me my success is understanding about what fat is. Going on a diet is mostly about getting rid of fat that you don't want, but it's really confusing out there because there's just so many different ways to talk about fat. Now, there's fat that you eat, there's fat in the diet, and then there's fat on your body, and they're not the same thing. And then there's different ways of thinking about fat. So you'll have heard of omegas, you'll have heard of fatty acids, and you'll have heard of saturation, like polysaturation or monosaturation, and so on. Now, today I want to concentrate and focus down on a certain type of fat, and that's the fat that's actually inside your body, because understanding that can be very helpful. So understanding how our body handles fat is the key to understanding why some diets work and others fail. Now, not all fat is created equal, and there's a big difference between subcutaneous fat, the fat under your skin, and ectopic fat. Now, that's the fat that ends up in places you don't want it to be. Now, for example, that's the liver, the pancreas, or visceral compartment around the organs. Your health depends less on how much fat you carry and more about whereabouts on your body it's stored. Some people can store a lot of subcutaneous fat and remain healthy, as much as 20 pounds. Others reach their limit sooner. Now, genetics, family history, and even ethnicity all influence how much storage you have that's safe, but it actually is possible to carry quite a lot of fat and not be unhealthy at all. So when subcutaneous fat cells overfill, they become inflamed and insulin resistance begins locally. Once the safe storage limit is exceeded, fat starts spilling into what are called ectopic deposits. Now, this is places where it shouldn't really be. Now, it doesn't happen just because you've exceeded your subcutaneous fat. It can also happen for other reasons. Stress, poor sleep, and some people are just unlucky enough to have a propensity to store fat in the wrong places. You might have heard the phrase toffee, right? That's thin on the outside, fat on the inside. And in those unfortunate cases, people can appear completely slim, but have so much visceral ectopic deposit inside that they are unhealthy. But if you have good sleep, you're not stressed, and you're just eating too much for whatever reason, and you get to your 20-pound limit, and then the fat starts overspilling, it has to go somewhere. And here's where the diet composition really matters, because a high carb diet, particularly one loaded with sugar and refined carbohydrates, anything with flour in it, that will repeatedly spike your insulin, and insulin is the sugar that tells your body to store energy. High insulin prevents fat from leaving storage, and at the same time drives the liver to convert any excess sugar into fat through a process called de novo lipogenesis. Most of that ends up as triglycerides, which are packaged into VLDL particles and released into the bloodstream. This is why people on high carb diets often have elevated serum triglycerides, even if they aren't overweight. Those triglycerides are a direct marker that your liver is under stress and producing more fat than it should, and they correlate closely with that visceral fat or ectopic fat accumulation. It's worth mentioning here also that if it's sugar rather than just refined carbohydrates, that sugar is half glucose, half fructose, and unfortunately your body Your muscles can't really use the fructose. A little bit is used by the gut, but by and large, all that fructose goes straight to the liver, where it can only be used by first being turned into liver fat. And liver fat is one of the most dangerous types of this ectopic or visceral fat tissue. And that can even spill out into the pancreas. Now, these deposits are active and dangerous. Visceral fat releases inflammatory signals and directly contributes to insulin resistance. Liver fat interferes with hepatic insulin sensitivity, raising fasting glucose and triglycerides. And pancreatic fat impairs insulin secretion, tipping someone from insulin resistance all the way into type 2 diabetes. This is why two people with identical body fat percentages can vastly differ metabolically. One person may carry mostly subcutaneous fat, which is metabolically safe, while the other has significant ectopic fat, insulin resistance and high triglycerides. So if we look at this picture, now the subcutaneous fat, the safe stuff, is on your bum. It's also can be on your arms as well, and on your external belly. But there's a certain characteristic shape that people have when they carry this visceral fat, which is in the organs. Now, mostly it's around the intestines. So this picture, you see the subcutaneous fat is on the outskirts of the body, in the thigh and in the bottom area. But all this stuff around the intestines and around the liver, this is where it all gets a bit dangerous. And it can be quite hard for you to know what your problem is. But if you've got a characteristic beer belly shape, and actually beer is one of these causes of this dangerous visceral fat in the middle, you get this characteristic shape where it's high up on the belly. So this could be the result of too much beer or too much sugar. So this person doesn't have much subcutaneous fat, but it's all the fat is concentrated into the inside and has this high up shape, whereas if it was all subcutaneous, the fat would be more here. So that's one sort of clue you have about where your fat might be. Now, that's sugar and that's beer. Now, sugar and beer, that's one thing. That's stress, bad sleep, sugar, beer. And refined carbs like flour, they tend to concentrate your fat in the visceral areas. Now, here's the weird thing. Someone gives you a diagnosis, you're obese, you've got fatty liver disease, you're pre-diabetic, and they say, lose weight. It's all about fat. And so you immediately think, what do I know about fat? I know that each gram of fat has twice the calories of protein or sugar or thereabouts. And I also know that fat is fat, so why eat fat? And so your first reaction might be to stop eating fat. And this is a big mistake. So, dietary fat you eat is different. It's not the same as your body fat. And just eating dietary fat on its own will not necessarily contribute to you having more fat, because it's handled differently. When you eat fat, it does not spike insulin very much at all the way carbohydrates do. When you consume fat, your body can store it safely in subcutaneous deposits. This is why low carb, higher fat diets don't necessarily cause the same metabolic issues. The energy being stored in the safe fat compartments is not stored in the organs that drive disease. So the visceral fat can be stored around your heart, around your liver, around your kidneys, around your intestines, and that can be hidden. But if you eat fat and you're avoiding those carbohydrates, you are more likely to deposit on your butt and on the outside. Now, here's where fasting enters the picture. If you've had a diagnosis, if you know you're obese, if you had a diagnosis of fatty liver, pre-diabetes or diabetes, this is where this sort of knowledge really helps. Fasting, what happens when you fast? Your insulin falls. Low insulin signals the body that it's time to release stored energy. Fat leaves the body's deposits, but not all fat is equal in this process. Metabolically active deposits, like in the liver and the visceral fat cells, are mobilized first. This is absolutely critical because these are the very deposits responsible for the inflammation, the insulin resistance, the elevated serum triglycerides. So as your liver fat decreases, hepatic insulin sensitivity improves, triglycerides in the blood fall, and fasting glucose often normalizes, sometimes before significant weight loss even occurs. Pancreatic fat, which is absolutely devastatingly bad for you, can also decline with sustained fasting or a low carb dieting, allowing beta cells to recover some function in early type 2 diabetes. Now, if you have as much as half a pound of liver fat, even less, you can become ill. There is no amount of pancreatic fat which is healthy, and you can probably sustain maybe 5 pounds of visceral fat before you start becoming ill or very inflamed. Now, if you're fasting and your body is prioritizing the liver fat and the visceral fat, then you're going to get well quite quickly. So it's all about dietary choices, avoiding ultra-processed foods, sugary drinks and refined carbohydrates, pasta, pastries, even rice, potato chips, all that stuff, processed stuff with lots of starch in. And it's about putting that insulin back in the box. So low carb eating and fasting reduced, so when they're together, low carb eating and fasting reduce the fat that drives disease, lowers inflammation, improve endothelial function and decrease cardiovascular risk. So it goes all the way down the line. Fat is okay. Do not fear fat. Low carb fasting, give it a try. It's not as bad as you think. Have one meal a day. It will kill you for 4 days, but thereafter it will soon become the new normal as your body starts to mobilize fat stores to quell your hunger. I hope you enjoyed that. You can subscribe here and like here and follow this video there.